Hello and welcome to Superstory Games, an independent game development company. I am Scarlett and I'm here to teach you the ropes of game genres and how they work. Starting with the action genre, action games mostly appear as subgenres such as shooter games and action-adventure games. In action games, the player usually takes on the role of a protagonist, and the player usually has to navigate a level, which can consist of avoiding obstacles, fighting enemies, and collecting items and weapons. At the end of a level or a chapter, the player must often defeat a boss that is more challenging than usual hostiles and often feature repetitive patterns of attack. They are usually the antagonist or in collaboration with the antagonist acting as their minions. Being struck by enemies and colliding with obstacles depletes the player's HP, which are health points, and lives if there are more than one. The player receives a game over when they run out of lives or HP. Action games are developed for all platforms as it is an easy feature to implement. On PC or consoles, a player's reaction time and hand-eye coordination can be tested, and on mobile this applies as to how fast a user can press or type out a command, like the shoot button. Action games usually constrict the player to a small area of the map and does not allow them to leave the confines while in the level or round, like in CSGO. True action games are not strictly narrative driven and are often endlessly replayable, and the only goal is maximizing your score. Action games are often multiplayer and feature player versus player action or cooperative mode where players work together to achieve the end goal. An example of this is in Super Mario Bros., where one player can play as Mario while the other plays as Luigi. Players can face physical challenges within action games such as accuracy and quick reaction times. Action games can also feature challenges such as races, like in Angry Birds Go, puzzles, like in Breath of the Wild, or spotting hidden items. These are not central to the genre. The player is often under a time limit, which limits strategic thinking and adds to the replayable nature of the game, as often a player can end up continuously dying to the same obstacle. CSGO, although not of the best graphical quality, aims to be photorealistic while slightly exaggerating features with its skins, which are equipable cosmetic textures. CSGO is a player versus player, or AI, game that isn't driven by any sort of narrative. CSGO requires players to have quick hand-eye coordination and reflexes to combat enemies. CSGO uses 3D assets. The player is essentially a walking 3D hitbox. This makes defense a much less viable option. While CSGO has infinite lives, dying will push back the player's score, which is the second aim of the game. The first being to have control of all the capture points and either defuse the bomb if you're on the SWAT team, or successfully bomb an enemy capture point if you're a terrorist. Mortal Kombat 11 uses advanced 3D photorealistic graphics as well as background moving animation. A lot of detail is focused on players' abilities, such as a lightning strike or grappling hook pulling the enemy towards you. The mechanics are through the use of the standard console controllers or Nintendo Switch controllers, and players can move with a joystick and attack with various buttons. Mortal Kombat 11 allows for the use of combos, which are achieved by reading the character whom you've picked's combo sheet and pressing the buttons in the order it shows in quick succession to unleash stronger attacks. For PC, the same concept applies with combos, but players will move using A or D, or the arrow keys, and press spacebar to jump. Super Mario Bros. Uses 2D simplistic flat-colored graphics. The graphics in Super Mario Bros. Are good considering it's 39 years old, and the main appeal of the game was that it was a multiplayer static action game. The mechanics of Super Mario Bros. Are through the use of the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo Entertainment System, and Wii, where the player uses lettered buttons to dictate movement. There are no attacks in the game, but the players can kill enemies by jumping on their heads. Action games have a large range of features. Action games aim to include physical challenges to the player like reflexes, coordination, and visibility. To be an advanced player within an action game, a player must have good reflexes, such as being able to turn around at a second's notice when you are being attacked in a 3D action game like CSGO, although increasing mouse sensitivity in settings helps. Players must also have good coordination with their eye and player movements in order to track enemies. Like in Sniper 3D. Visibility is an important part of action games, as most games provide players with various hiding spots that they can snipe and camp in. So being alert is essential and always ready to be on the attack. For simpler games like 2D arcade action games like Donkey Kong, the player needs to be able to time and evade the barrels in order to use the hammer to defeat Donkey Kong. Action games often have single-player and multiplayer modes without an accompanying narrative. Players can progress through the game by completing levels, usually more than one, before a boss appears. Levels often depict different regions, with varying enemies inside each region. Each level involves challenges, and it depends on what type of action game you're playing as to what challenges you end up facing, like hand-eye coordination in a shooter, or solving a puzzle which the player must complete to finish the challenge or the game. Some action games have lives, which allow you to die without respawning at the beginning of the level, although modern action games have offered saved games and checkpoints to allow the player to respawn partway through a level. Increasingly, action games feature resurrections, which give the player a choice to respawn with full lives and their items if they pay a sum of in-game money. The obstacles and enemies usually follow specific patterns of actions. Players learn these traits and learn to evade and kill the enemies based off of their patterns of attacks. Bosses usually are the peak difficulty of the game and act unpredictably almost, or with very constant pattern shifts, making it hard for a player to strike at an opening. Some levels have hidden areas that allow the player to find rarer items, like in Super Mario Bros., where you can find hidden pipes to jump down. Action games can also have time limits, which creates a high-stress situation that the player must manage quickly or else they lose the level. Games as a whole are either 2D or 3D. 2D action games would use a side-scroller or a top-down view. The screen scrolls as the player moves in the right direction in the level. In 3D action games, the perspective is normally in first person or a third person perspective of the character. Action games usually have toggled mini-maps which allow them to see miniaturized pathways on their screen, which helps for navigation. Items collected in quests are sometimes not for immediate use, but rather later stages in the game, like keeping a hold of a mana key, for example. How a action game progresses depends on what type of action game it is, but as an example I will be using CSGO. CSGO is an example of emergent gameplay, as the player has to be constantly on alert during a round without pause, and ready to react to the enemy encounters. Reaction time is very important in this subgenre of action games, which are known as FPS or just shooters. The player begins with limited access to maps and game modes, and the player can unlock these new game modes and new cosmetic items by completing in-game quests and winning rounds. For example, a quest might be like headshot 15 players. Progression involves improving DPS, which is damage per second, by figuring out which gun best fits your playstyle, and learning to turn faster, shoot faster, and improve accuracy and damage. Players have to reload their gun after using all their ammo, which leaves the player vulnerable for a crucial few seconds, so it's best for players to constantly reload whilst they are moving and not being attacked, rather than during the middle of a gunning down. Action games are the most popular game genre in the whole world, but are usually a part of a hybrid, like the action-adventure genre, or just shooters. There are certain expectations that come with the action genre, and the games they are applied to. CSGO is a hybrid of the action genre and does not meet the typical expectations for an action game very well. It may be a high action-packed game, but it is not a very good action game. This stems from numerous factors. Typically, in an action game, the player expects levels or at least stages that they can overcome within a game to show that they have progressed, but CSGO lacks this key feature, as well as having no protagonist and no challenges the player must face, other than shooting each other to oblivion. It gets repetitive and boring fast. CSGO manages to meet some of the expectations, such as being packed full of action. Players are constantly at odds with each other and there is usually no dull moment. However, there are no bosses to defeat, no variety of enemies, as all hostiles are either players or AI players, and is a mesh of the same avatar that is recolored and just copied and pasted to the other 30 players within the rounds, unless you paid for a skin, of course. Most of CSGO's demographic are in America, Germany, Brazil, China, and Russia, as these figures dominate the charts, and often enough you'll be in a server surrounded by unintelligible screaming echoing from the voice chat. CSGO was once a highly regarded game before its re-release, where they made the game free to play. There were thousands of recurring players before this. The problem with free-to-play games is that hackers can just make new accounts to purchase the game and continue hacking. It's a lawless system, and if the players have spent £30 on the game beforehand, they would be less likely to risk their account being banned. CSGO's emergent gameplay makes it relatively engaging, and the photorealistic graphics contribute to its demographic. Ultimately, CSGO is a fun game, but it fails to meet the criteria that is associated with action games and their subgenres. I believe CSGO fails to meet their target audience's expectations and is one of the key reasons people tend to steer clear of it. It is an okay game. The last genre of games we will be looking at in this video is the simulation genre. A simulation game is a diverse array of games that try to replicate real-world activities. Simulation games simulate jobs and activities from real life and fantasy to provide entertainment. Some simulations are satisfying, like power washing a virtual wall in Power Wash Simulator, or quenching your urge by stealing valuables in Thief Simulator. Normally, there are no strict confines within the game or explicit goals. The player is usually allowed to control a character or environment freely. There are many different types of simulation games, such as life and caring simulations like Wobble Dogs and The Sims, where the player takes care of the entities within the game, such as the Wobble Dogs and The Sims. There are also management simulations like SimCity, where a player must manage resources and expand their empire or city in this case. There are also role simulations like Surgeon Simulator and Flight Simulator, where the player emulates being a surgeon or a pilot. Most simulation games involve resource management, but it is usually not the main goal. Resource management usually involves producing items from a starting free resource that allows the player to generate currency to buy upgrades for whatever they are emulating, like better city buildings in SimCity or better Wobble Dog care facilities in Wobble Dogs. The realism present in these games, whether that be the accuracy of the simulation in comparison with real life or the graphics, can be seen as educational training for some who express interest in pursuing the career being simulated. Simulation games have a wide range of styles, from realism to a goofy cartoonish style for pure entertainment. Microsoft Flight Simulator is an extreme realistic simulation game that simulates the flying of planes across the world. Microsoft Flight Simulator is a 3D photorealistic creation of the entire world that you can navigate on different designed planes and into the terrain and entities. Microsoft Flight Simulator is the largest game, file size and in-game, in the world. Microsoft Flight Simulator has realistic aircraft and terrain that was made using a Bozo, which scanned actual airframes inside and out, and an Artec Leo 3D scanner, which provides a 0.5mm resolution. The rendering of the aircraft is absolute down to the dirt and scuffs on the aircraft. Wobble Dogs is a 3D cartoony entertainment simulation. Wobble Dogs' design is simplistic and exaggerated for comedic effect, making it ideal for children. Wobble Dogs simulates caring for a virtual dog with a twist. Dogs can gain mutations which impact their needs and wants. Wobble Dogs uses cel-shaded graphics and an easy and simple management system. The Sims 4 uses 3D photorealistic graphics. The graphics in The Sims 4 are complex, with the multi-level design tools for players and foundation structures. The Sims 4 also has a massive color palette for all structures and a large customization feature for entities such as the Sims, pets, and vehicles. Simulation games have a variety of features. Most simulation games are an example of non-linear gameplay. This is due to the fact that simulators usually allow a player an open world without quests and confines, and there is no specific order nor quick-paced action, but rather idle management of resources and constant experimentation within the world. The type of simulation game directly impacts gameplay and whether there are goals, quests, or other rules to the game. Life simulations imitate life and how it plays out, which can range to simulating living life, caring for life, or playing God and creating life. Business simulations force you to face the economic situations and struggles that come with managing your own business. It's profits, losses, and budgeting. A good example of this is in PC Building Simulator. City building simulation games allow you to sow the seeds of your world, metaphorically, as you have the power to manage the rules, collect resources, and to build your city. Flight simulators like Microsoft Flight Simulator feature the player controlling an aircraft. The player is able to explore the world through the skies. The graphics are extremely realistic, and the realism shows the beauty of Earth and is a core reason as to why it is a very successful game. Sports games, the realistic ones, are a subgenre of simulation games as they imitate real-life activities. Managing resources are essential to most simulation games. This is where some simulation games might feature emergent gameplay, as the player will have to be thorough in their decisions, as it will impact their gameplay, such as purchasing faster production speed, or much more detrimental effects like in PC Building Simulator. If the player doesn't have enough cash left to buy essential parts for an order, it will negatively impact their reviews and generate less or even a negative profit. The types of resources is dependent on the type of simulation. The resources can range from anything from cash to raw materials such as wood, metal, and so on. Some simulation games have an auto-processing of resources, like in The Sims 4. A player can buy new utilities from their home instantly with cash, whereas in Thief Simulator, the player must break in, carry the valuables to their car, and then drive to their hideout, and then to the pawnbroker if they want to sell it. This is manual processing. Some simulation games also require the player to manage entities. This could be humans or animals. The Sims 4 is a good example of entity management, as the player has Sims, which are human characters, that they can control. The player makes sure that their Sims eat, sleep, and perform useful tasks, such as working in order to get money. The player is also in control of their character's love life and needs to make the best choices and actions to attract other Sims to theirs. In Wobble Dogs, the player has to manage their Wobble Dogs and make sure they don't die by feeding them, caring for them, and performing usual husbandry actions associated with dog care, apart from mutant genetics, of course. PC Building Simulator has a high level of realism, which makes it a perfect example of an education entertainment simulation game, as it does teach you about the important processes of building a PC, whereas Wobble Dogs is purely made for entertainment, as you cannot breed mutant dogs in real life, obviously. But it also simulates an almost stress-free environment that is beneficial to players when attempting to enjoy a game. But if your mutant dog dies, it will probably be the most heartbreaking experience of your life, comedically of course. How they progress and what the target audience expects depends on the kind of simulation game, but I will be using Wobble Dogs as an example. Wobble Dogs is an example of both emergent and non-linear gameplay. Players can essentially let the Wobble Dogs do whatever they want, and the dogs will mutate by themselves by consuming any edible items they find and collecting bacteria. This is the non-linear aspect of the gameplay. However, the emergent element comes into play when the bacteria the dogs consumes harms them, like gaining ungodly mutations that makes it so fat it can't walk. The player must constantly take care of the Wobble Dogs and make sure they don't ingest harmful things like dirt. The player begins the game with a single Wobble Dog hatchling. The player will initially have limited food choices for their Wobble Dog. Each food contains different bacteria. When ingested, the Wobble Dog can gain mutations it can pass onto itself when pupating or through its offspring, and the cycle continues. To progress, the player unlocks new foods, facilities, and ways to care for their Wobble Dogs and expand their kennel, allowing them to keep more Wobble Dogs and breed them together. Simulation games are one of the most relaxing game genres, and they need to be enjoyable for players to play, so there come expectations. Simulation games are usually hybrids to make gameplay smoother and add a goal or purpose to the game. Wobble Dogs is a hybrid of the life simulation genre and the sandbox genre. Wobble Dogs is an excellent example of a pristine simulation game. In Wobble Dogs, the player is a dog breeder and takes on husbandry roles that accompany the job, such as grooming, feeding, and watching and playing with the Wobble Dogs, which is the management of entities element, a core fundamental to the life simulation genre. Players want to be stress-free when indulging in simulation games. It is the most common stress burner genre, and as such, the game shouldn't be a constant struggle to be on top. Wobble Dogs does this well, as like in real life, the Wobble Dogs perform funny actions and do strange things for comedic effect. This creates a stress-free environment for players. Wobble Dogs manages to meet all of the expectations for simulation games, such as simulating a real role, minus the mutant dogs, but this only adds to the enjoyability of the game. A simple design, which is perfectly representative of the stress-free life simulation genre, the development of entities, the Wobble Dogs evolving, and the management of entities. Most of Wobble Dogs' demographic are likely to be in America, England, Japan, and China, as they are the most popular consumers of simulation games. Wobble Dog players are likely to be niche gamers, as although it has thousands of positive reviews, there's only a small concurrent number of players on the game at any one time, though the figures are stable. Wobble Dogs is one of the most highly regarded simulation games amongst niche players, and during its alpha, it's obtained lots of positive feedback, making it into the wacky yet astounding game it is now. Wobble Dogs utilizes emergent gameplay to create a smooth system of gameplay without high-cost consequences, and the cartoonish graphics contribute to its demographic, and is an all-age inclusive game with a great market towards kids. Wobble Dogs surpasses the criteria that is required of simulation games and their subgenres. I believe Wobble Dogs meets their target audience's expectations and is a fantastic, creative, and engaging game.